Hello and welcome to Comic Book Herald's Crack and Krakoa number 21, New Mutants number 2 review. I'm your host, Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. Today I'll be exploring the New Mutants second issue written by Jonathan Hickman with art by Rod Reis as we continue the space adventures of the OG New Mutants lineup. If you like what I'm doing here on Comic Book Herald, the YouTube channel, on comicbookherald.com, on the podcast, Comic Book Herald's Best Comics Ever, please consider liking and subscribing, sharing with a friend, and helping us grow. I am recording this the week of Thanksgiving. There were 3 X-Men comics this week in an exciting release in the Dawn of X as we continue to explore every new comic book release, and I'll be recording episodes for all 3, and I do want to give a big shout of thanks to those of you who have been supporting Comic Book Herald throughout the year. We've had some exciting growth this year, and I'm excited to see it continue. So, without further ado, let's get into our New Mutants number 2 review here. This is the Shi'ar Empire and X-Men Cosmics. We have Hickman continuing the spacefaring work in a story with much deeper connections to the Marvel cosmic scene and recent X-Men comics than I was necessarily expecting. Today I'll answer: how is New Mutants exploring the cosmic scene? What's Hickman's plan for fitting New Mutants into the House of X Powers of 10 big picture? Xandra and the Shi'ar government explored. Some Marvel Comics history to help give you a little bit of context for some of the developments in this issue as well. As I mentioned, if you're enjoying on YouTube, please consider liking and subscribing. So, how is New Mutants exploring the cosmic scene? Well, we follow up in the aftermath of the New Mutants and Starjammer's egg-stealing invasion into Shi'ar space with Blind Space Lawyer, an incredible Daredevil parody, Murd Blurdock giving the New Mutants a hilariously poor defense representation. The New Mutants are, of course, sentenced from space jail to Shi'ar custody, although as luck would have it, they're placed in the care of Smasher and Cannonball, the very couple they set out to find. Hickman and Reis are presenting a welcome understanding of what makes the original New Mutants lineup tick, with a central focus on Hickman's well-worn love of Sam and Bobby's enduring friendship. Admittedly, this has yet to pay many dividends for the non-OG characters, as Mondo and Chamber's involvement has plenty of work to go before we're given much on the presence of these characters. There's a well-earned confidence to Hickman's storytelling that allows him and Reis to devote entire sequences to the New Mutants lineup, all playing poker with alien cards that none of them understand but Cypher, and that none of them can win, except for Danny Moonstar. It's a nice reminder to let the comic book breathe, to revel in the fact that we can all enjoy reading some friends playing a game with the understanding that we're in confident hands here for a long-term plan. The biggest reveal for me in New Mutants number 2 is how hard the book is diving into the inner workings and status of the Shi'ar Empire. Smasher, Cannonball's wife and member of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, has been Hickman's shortcut to the Shi'ar since his days writing Avengers, and we see that trend continue heavily in this issue. Before we get into the seeds that are planted here and what they may mean for Hickman's X-Men big picture, let's explore some of the Shi'ar and X-Men history that makes these scenes meaningful. First off, let's look at the big development in the reintroduction of Xandra and Gladiator's plans to instill her as the Shi'ar Emperor so he can return to his more familiar role as Praetor of the Imperial Guard. There are a few immediate historical questions that might come to mind here, and for me the following thoughts prevailed. Wait, why do I remember the name Xandra, and what's her connection to Lilandra? How long has Gladiator actually been Emperor of the Shi'ar? Let's get into it. Xandra debuted in Kelly Thompson and Oscar Bazaldua's Mr. and Mrs. X, the post-Rogue and Gambit wedding series that, for the record, is a really nice continuation of Thompson's work, making Rogue and Gambit comics actually interesting to me. The series ran from 2018 to 2019, so it is very recent, building up to House of and Powers of 10. As Kate Pratt explains to Rogue and Gambit, Xandra is the genetically engineered child of Professor Xavier and Lilandra Naramani, the longtime Majestrix of the Shi'ar Empire and on-again, off-again partner of Charles Xavier. I'll mention here as well that if you're very, very unfamiliar with the likes of Lilandra and the Shi'ar Empire, they have roots in X-Men comics going all the way back to like the original Phoenix Saga and eventually the Dark Phoenix Saga in the late 70s of Uncanny X-Men. You're going to want to look around Uncanny, really at the start of the run, frankly, like Uncanny X-Men number 94 when Chris Claremont takes over writing, which follows up on Giant Size X-Men, which is the all-new, all-different kickoff. But you could jump to like Uncanny X-Men, like 101, 102. Actually, really, like it all kind of kicks off in issue number 100 for the Phoenix Saga. Of course, the entire Claremont-penned era, this being with Dave Cockrum into art by John Byrne, is well worth reading. But that's where we get the Shi'ar really built out as this alien race. A lot of the designs inspired by Dave Cockrum's, fascination and work on Legion of Superheroes over on the DC side. So in addition to a claim to the throne, Xandra has some, I'd argue, relatively undefined part of Professor X's powers, allowing her to do things like read Rogue's mind, offer to fix Rogue's power set, and cause mass hallucinations. She's described as an Omega-level weapon. My first immediate question here is how we'll distinguish that from an Omega-level mutant. Speaking of Nermanis, the longtime ruling lineage of the Shi'ar, as long as we've known them in the X-Men universe, Lilandra has actually been off the table for the whole decade, following her death in War of Kings #4. I'll admit, I was genuinely surprised to find she's still dead after all this time. And it's the first time I considered in earnest the possibility of Krakoan resurrection protocols being used for non-mutants. Might Professor X consider such a use, assuming we see him again for Lilandra? While we're reflecting back on War of Kings, it's worth noting here that this is also during a period of Marvel continuity when Vulcan Summers, most recently seen in X-Men #1, inviting slovenly gifts to Summers' house and acting like a pretty humorous frat guy, was ruling the Shi'ar with an iron fist. Not the Danny Rand kind, known as Emperor Vulcan. I won't pretend to know the exact plot mechanics, but this connection to the Shi'ar feels like a pretty sensible place to bring back Vulcan. Again, last seen having a grand old time with the Summers, and acknowledge his connection, quite controversial, with the Shi'ar Empire. Since Lilandra's death, Gladiator, aka Kalark, has been ruling the Shi'ar. Given that we see a transference of rule nearly every time the X-Men meet the Shi'ar, this actually seems like a relatively successful period of rule for Gladiator. Intriguingly, we've actually seen Gladiator's rule of the Shi'ar during Hickman's run on Avengers and New Avengers. There are a number of ways we see connective tissue between this pre-Secret Wars Shi'ar interlude and what Hickman's doing with the X-Men in space now, from Gladiator's trusted counsel, oracle, and mentor of the Imperial Guard, to Bobby DaCosta's AIM weapon they used to defend Earth from the Shi'ar during the Avengers Time Run Out issues. You can see most of the Shi'ar-heavy stuff occurring during Avengers #41 to #44 back in 2015. In general, though, Gladiator is Emperor of the Shi'ar first and an X-Men ally second. He even once sent his son to school with the X-Men during Wolverine and the X-Men days. Shouts to Kid Gladiator, although admittedly this was a punishment for his son. To bring that all full circle, Gladiator's plan for placing Xandra back on the throne of the Shi'ar Empire involves enlisting the aid of the New Mutants to bring Deathbird back to Chandalar, where Gladiator apparently trusts the longtime Lilandra foe and also her sister to ready Xandra to rule. I'd imagine more detail will follow regarding the particulars of how Gladiator expects this to work, but the cliffhanger reminded me of the overall approach to familiar enemies in the Hickman era of X-Men. House of X, #5, welcomed all the old X-foes into Krakoa, and we've been witnessing a dawn of X where Apocalypse and Gambit are on the same team and not fighting each other, and not with Gambit turned into a Horseman of Death. It's not surprising, then, that Deathbird might come back to Shi'ar royal rule with less of those familiar claims to the throne, right? Maybe let bygones be bygones, have a solve for actually bringing her into Shi'ar rule that suits Deathbird, and again, let's not play out the same story that we've seen, which is Deathbird trying to usurp the throne. And speaking of those Vulcan connections, Vulcan and Deathbird do have a romantic relationship, I believe, during his time as Emperor, and I'm going off the cuff on this one, but there may be a child involved if I'm not entirely mistaken. What's Hickman's plan for fitting New Mutants into the House of X Powers of 10 big picture? Well, there are two seemingly throwaway lines in New Mutants #2 that actually tease out some of the reasons Jonathan Hickman has chosen to co-write the early plotting of New Mutants. In Bobby's early expositioning, he lets us know his Earth lawyers, not to be confused with space lawyer Mert Blurdock, are taking care of XCorp while he's in space. So what's XCorp? Another example of Hickman's love of Morrison's new X-Men, and I'll just quote straight from the wiki here. This organization was created to ensure the protection of mutant rights throughout the world due to the increasing number of mutants and widespread bigotry and hate crimes against them. As far as I can tell, XCorp is almost certainly going to be a new title in the Dawn of X, but has not officially been solicited by Marvel yet. As a result, this one isn't much of a secret, but I wasn't aware XCorp was a Bobby-owned production, meaning it looks like he's replaced AIM, the longtime, intelligent mechanics, evil arm in the Marvel Universe that he bought and kind of positioned towards good. Looks like he's replaced AIM with XCorp. I'll talk about this more once the book is officially solicited, but XCorp has a pretty sensible role to play alongside the likes of Marauders, reacting and reaching out to quote-unquote civilians in the world outside of Krakoa and the challenges they may face. I'd have to imagine that XCorp bases this time, or like the bases, the little headquarters, are going to be actual the Krakoan embassies, and the book could offer a nice inside glimpse into the day-to-day within these new Krakoan homes around the world, right? We really haven't seen much of that so far. So, what else do we think Hickman is planning here as far as his use of the the New Mutants title? Well, the other major line with major potential ramifications comes from a quick Oracle reference. They're discussing things here over the Shi'ar throne with Gladiator when she states, "Titans are assembling for war." This feels very relevant with Hickman's Powers of 10 work. It's possible to interpret this reference a few ways. Titans could mean anything from literal titans like Eros, Mentor, and Thanos to a broader, just powerful force use. But my expectation at this is pretty intentional, and it actually ties directly to all the really hard science fiction building Hickman and Tom Mueller were doing with data pages in Powers of 10. Speaking of which, here's the most relevant one. From Powers of 10, number 5, we see a Titan as the first universal type of society, an interstellar society that has become so advanced that the density of its unified intelligence has collapsed space-time into a singularity. I won't pretend to understand the literal galaxy brain thinking Hickman's doing here, but the reference makes me wonder if the Shi'ar are gearing up for a Shi'ar versus Phalanx war in the pages of New Mutants. There's the most groundwork laid for that confrontation through House of X and Powers of 10, although, it certainly could be something new. I'm very interested in seeing Titan defined a little more tangibly, tactfully, in the actual comic book application, because those definitions are quite broad. So there you have it. I'm a pretty big fan of what New Mutants has been doing so far. Hickman is finding a way to build the world, build some plotting for what's to come in this new X-Men world and run in the Dawn of X, while also taking a lot of time to just let the New Mutants classic line up, the one that popularized probably most heavily by Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz in the 1980s before Louis Simonson took over and did the same. And it's just, it's, if you like these characters, if you have familiarity with these characters, it's nice to see them just hanging out and going on space adventures and reuniting with the likes of Cannonball. Again, if you're a fan of the Avengers run, it's good to see Sam and Bobby together again. It's good to see Smasher back in the fray, and it's particularly nice to see her punching Bobby right in the nose, because much as we might love him, he definitely has it coming sometimes. So New Mutants number 2, I'm a fan. I think it's good. I definitely would say stick with it if you've been checking it out. I do think reading some classic, 80s New Mutants could go a long way here. I don't want to say it's required reading, but definitely we're not getting a lot about, hey, here's Ileana's deal. So familiarity with the characters, I do think, which is frequently the case in long-running superhero comics, may help. I'm curious to hear what you all think. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, please consider commenting and telling me what your opinions and theories about the New Mutants title are. I've got some thoughts here, obviously, on where this book might be going in space. I think it kind of feels like Hickman's attempt to write a stealth Shi'ar book, but knowing New Mutants has more of a legacy in X-Men than just launching a straight up, Shi'ar Empire #1, as much as I'd be on board for that. Maybe we'll get that here in the future. Who's to say? I think that could be a whole lot of fun. But again, please comment, like, and subscribe if you like the content here. And as always, go on over to comicbookherald.com, where you can find all sorts of content we're putting out. Next up on the YouTube channel and on Best Comics Ever, I will be doing reviews of the other X-Men books that came out this week. We got X-Force #2 and Fallen Angels #2 coming up. So check out the X-Men playlist on the YouTube channel if you want to continue with more of the Crack and Krakoa that I'm doing on CBH. Thanks everybody for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.